I was a night guard at a hospital. One night I realized I wasn't alone. I never believed in ghosts, but after that one night, I quit my job and never looked back. This story still haunts me. I was working night security at a small hospital. Most shifts were uneventful. Just me, the cameras, and silence. Around 2 a.m., one of the feeds glitched. It showed a figure by the window, but that room was supposed to be empty. I decided to check it out. The hallway felt off, like something was watching me. Lights flickered as I passed. I stopped when I reached the end of the hall. Before me stood 2 doors, room 312 and room 313. The room on the left, 312, was occupied by an elderly woman who had been there for months. She wouldn't bother coming out at night. Plus, her door was slightly ajar, revealing her sleeping form, so it must have been the room on the right. Room 313, I walked toward it. As I approached, I could see the outline of a person by the window through the frosted glass. My heart started to race. What was I going to find? I knocked softly, then waited. No response. I tried the knob. Locked. Thinking back, I shouldn't have been surprised. Of course the room would be locked. Why was I expecting anything else? But I did. And so I continued to stare at the door in confusion until I noticed something odd. It wasn't completely closed. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed the door open. Inside was darkness. I squinted, trying to see inside. Nothing. Where was the person? Had they slipped out before I entered? Deciding to investigate further, I ventured deeper into the room. My footsteps echoed in the silence. Suddenly, a movement caught my eye. It was near the bed. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. There, sitting on the edge of the bed, was a man. He was wearing a white coat. I froze. I don't know how long I stood there watching him, but eventually he stood up. He was tall and thin. He turned toward me, and that's when I saw his face. Rather, I should say I saw the lack of it. His face was smooth, almost translucent, devoid of any features. There was no nose, no eyes, no mouth. It was like staring into a blank canvas, or worse, a peeled avocado. I couldn't look away. I was mesmerized by the grotesque sight before me. His head tilted slightly to the side, and I could see the outline of his jaw, or what was once his jaw. I don't want to be too graphic, but it was as if someone had taken a scoop and removed a chunk from his facial structure, leaving behind a gaping void where his lower face should have been. Describe it in another way, his bottom half looked like it had been sanded down, like an artist working on a sculpture, trying to get the perfect angle. Except this wasn't a work of art. It was a human being, or what was left of one. I managed to break away from the unsettling sight and stumbled backward. I needed to get out of that room. As I retreated, I noticed blood on the floor. It wasn't fresh, but the sight of it sent shivers down my spine. My legs started to shake. I felt a sudden rush of adrenaline, and panic surged through me. I turned and fled, practically sprinting down the hallway. In hindsight, I know I should have reported that incident, but fear had paralyzed me. What would they have done? Send in another night guard to check the room? Maybe, I thought, shaking my head. How stupid of me. Of course they wouldn't do that. They'd assign a team to investigate, a team of professionals. So I went to work the next day, hoping to put the previous night's events out of my mind. But I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. I kept checking room 313. It was supposed to be vacant, yet it seemed to be occupied. The monitor showed a figure moving around the room. Walking, sitting, even sleeping, but that wasn't possible. There was no one in that room. And then I noticed something else. Sometimes the figure on the screen was different. Another time I saw a woman in a Victorian nightgown, then an old man wearing a tweed jacket. And sometimes there were 2 figures, like they were having a conversation. But since there was no audio on the surveillance system, I couldn't hear what they were saying. I spent hours watching these apparitions come and go. I was fascinated and terrified. Finally, my shift ended, and I clocked out. The next day, I spoke to my supervisor. But he just laughed and shrugged it off as a technical glitch. But I knew what I had seen. There was no denying it. I couldn't explain it either. All I could do was wonder why those rooms were sealed off, and why those people were trapped inside. My friends tried to convince me that there was a logical explanation for what I'd witnessed. Not the living dead, just the dead. They were stuck in that hospital, unable to move on. For them, the hospital was their last memory, their final resting place. For me, it was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I started researching the hospital's history. I found out that many patients and staff had died there over the years, some from natural causes, others from medical errors, accidents, or violence, and among them, a few unexplained deaths. It became clear to me that the hospital wasn't just a building, it was a graveyard of souls, and those souls were restless. After a week of contemplating, I finally gathered my courage and decided to confront my fears head-on. I returned to the hospital armed with a flashlight and a recorder, planned to document any sounds or voices I might encounter. The night was dark and stormy, which added to the eerie atmosphere. I checked the surveillance monitors and they were all showing static. Perfect. Now I wouldn't be distracted by those images of the specters in the rooms. As I walked down the deserted corridors, the wind howled outside, mimicking a mournful cry. The flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. I shivered not only because of the cold seeping through my clothes, but also from the growing dread in my heart. Suddenly a crash echoed through the silent hospital. Startled, I whirled around to face the sound. My flashlight beam danced frantically, searching for the source of the noise. Had I really heard what I thought I heard? A crash in an empty hospital? I stood frozen, listening intently. Seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The crash hadn't been a hallucination. I could hear the distinct sound of shattering glass. My heart pounded against my ribs as I followed the sound. It led me to a pharmacy. Pushing the door open, I found rows upon rows of untouched medicine cabinets. The crash must have come from above. I looked up to see a glass cabinet hanging precariously from the ceiling, its contents spilled on the floor below. I moved closer and saw that the glass wasn't broken. It had been removed deliberately. But who would do such a thing, and why? As I stood there pondering, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I had a strong urge to leave. Quickly, the pharmacy suddenly seemed very cramped, the shadows deepening and closing in around me. Fumbling with my recorder, I switched it on and whispered, "Is anyone there?" Silence. But just as I began to relax slightly, a voice echoed through the room. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. "Leave." I froze. Did I imagine it? The voice was soft, feminine, and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And it wanted me to leave. I didn't need to be told twice. I practically ran back to the security office, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't believe what I had experienced, a talking ghost. It made me wonder what other secrets the hospital was hiding. Eager to understand my ghostly encounter, I delved into the hospital's past. But what I discovered only deepened the mystery. I learned that the hospital had a troubled history. Rumors swirled about medical experiments, unethical practices, and even a secret society operating within its walls. As the first pieced together the clues, I realized that the hospital wasn't just a place of healing, it was a place of pain, suffering, and death. One name kept popping up, Dr. Alistair Finch. He was a respected physician, or so everyone thought. I found out that many patients died under his care, and not from natural causes. But when I dug deeper into the records, the files were sealed. There were no records of autopsies or investigations. It was as if the deaths were erased from history. Pored over old yearbooks, searching for any mention of Dr. Finch or the unexplained deaths. That's when I found it, a faded newspaper clipping from 1947. The headline read, "Prominent Doctor Found Dead, Mysterious Circumstances." The article stated that Dr. Finch had been found lifeless in his office with a single stab wound. The case was ruled as suicide, but many suspected foul play. It's all made sense now. The hospital, the deaths, the secret society, it was all linked to Dr. Finch. But who was he, and what was his connection to the other entities I'd seen in the hospital? Determined to uncover the truth, I returned to the hospital. I focused on Dr. Finch's office. Determined to find evidence of his crimes and maybe even find his ghost? The office was dusty and cobwebbed, filled with old files and decaying furniture. As I sifted through the documents, I came across a hidden compartment in Dr. Finch's desk. Inside, I found a diary. It was bound in leather and locked with an old-fashioned key. With trembling hands, I opened the diary. Each page was filled with cryptic notes and sketches. It was Dr. Finch's research journal. The entries detailed experiments on patients, including tests of endurance, psychological manipulation, and even attempts to raise the dead. It was horrifying to read, but I couldn't stop. Then I found a sketch of a pentagram and a list of names. And among them, the names of several patients who had died under mysterious circumstances. And then I saw my own name. I quickly closed the book, my heart racing. Was Dr. Finch's research still going on? Was I part of his twisted experiments? Just then, I heard a voice behind me. Looking for something? I whirled around to find a tall, gaunt man standing in the doorway. He had piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. Fear constricted my throat. Who was he? How long had he been there? I stammered. The man smiled, a cruel, predatory grin that sent shivers down my spine. "Your worst nightmare," he said, and with that, he lunged toward me. Terror propelled me into action. I scrambled back, knocking over a chair in my haste. The man advanced, his eyes gleaming with an eerie light. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room for an escape. Seeing a window, I bolted toward it. But as I reached for the handle, a cold hand clamped onto my shoulder. I screamed, thrashing wildly, but the grip tightened. I struggled in vain, my heart pounding against my ribs. Then the man leaned close to me, his hot breath on my ear. "You can't escape," he hissed. "Not from me, not from this place." With a sudden surge of strength, he yanked me away from the window and pulled me back toward him. Panic seized me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was constricted with fear. As he closed in, I shut my eyes tight, bracing for the worst. But instead of pain, I felt a searing cold envelop me. When I opened my eyes, the man was gone. In his place was a mirror. I stared at my reflection, gasping. My body was covered with goosebumps. Then I noticed something else. In the reflection, I saw not only myself, but also the man. He stood behind me, his face inches from mine. His eyes burned into mine, his lips curled into a menacing smile. I screamed, scrambling away from the mirror. But the image followed me. It mirrored my movements, taunting me with its presence. Trapped between mirrors, I had nowhere to run. The image loomed closer, its smile widening. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. Then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold floor of the security office. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air. Groaning, I sat up. My head pounded, and my clothes were torn and dirty. Shaking, I looked around the room. The computers were on, and the surveillance monitors displayed the familiar faces of the hospital staff going about their morning rounds. Relief washed over me. It had been a dream, a terrifying nightmare. But as I reached out to switch on the main monitor, I saw it. The same room I'd seen in my dream. The room I'd fled in terror. And standing in front of me, or rather behind me, was my tormentor. His eyes locked onto mine. His lips moved, forming a silent smile. I stumbled back, knocking over my chair. The dream wasn't over. It was just beginning.